Better too. All right. Welcome, welcome. You know, it is rare that I have a Tuesday afternoon where two of the people that I'm most fond of in the world I get to sit and chat with. So we're going to give the audience a moment to come online and join us. But in the meanwhile, let me just say how happy I am to see you both.
Let me just say, how about them Heat?
Love that countdown.
Yeah.
I feel a little anticlimactic after that build up.
Desmond, what is the series? Is it 2-1?
Yeah, it's 2-1.
It's 2-1. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I know we'll get into it a little bit, but I know you must recognize that there's a very famous Laker who is behind your campaign. So you better be careful.
Yeah, but he's joined by a very famous Heat player as well as the Heat organization that's doubled down on it. So, at the end of the day, Mr. James might have to step it up a notch or two.
Do you do any famous wrestlers behind the campaign? Because that's all I really know.
Absolutely.
We're actually looking at Nature Boy Ric Flair.
There we go.
There it is. Well, let me just do some quick intros and welcome everyone. Happy Tuesday afternoon for those on the East Coast, Tuesday morning for those on the West. I'm Marcus Glover, and I'm a friend of yours, and I am a brother to these fantastic two gentlemen who I have not had a very difficult time, but I twisted their arm to come and do this live stream with me today, primarily because I'm just so proud of the work that they're doing. But there is this little urgent thing called democracy happening right now. And we're going to use some time to get into that. So the title of today's talk is Let My People Vote. Justice is on the ballot. And I'm going to first start with the man you can see actually sitting behind him are blow-ups of his book, which I believe is just released today, if I'm not incorrect. Wow, boom, there it is.
Get your copy.
Just so proud of you, my good brother. And so for those who are unfamiliar, Mr. Desmond Meade, 2019 Time 100 Most Influential People. We will get into some of the things that you've done. Amendment 4, the most recent of paying off fines and fees. But I'd actually like to start, if you wouldn't mind, by taking us to that railroad. Often you bring people to a moment of reality. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about that moment at the railroad.
Marcus, first of all, let me thank you for inviting me, and let the record reflect that you didn't have to twist my arm that much.
This is true.
To get me to be on, it's and definitely when you're talking about your other guest, Billy Watterson, that's like my little brother there. So, hey, I would jump at this opportunity to hang out with you and Billy. But my name is Desmond Meade. I am the executive director of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. We're an organization that's led by people with previous felony convictions, as well as folks who have loved ones that's been impacted by our criminal injustice system. We have over 20 chapters throughout the state of Florida, almost 7,000 members, and we're building powers within marginalized communities, and definitely among people who've been impacted by the justice system. My story is one that starts, that at least I like to start in August of 2005 when I was standing in front of railroad tracks, waiting on a train to come so I can jump in front of it. You know, that day that I stood there, I was a broken man. I was homeless. I was hooked on crack cocaine. I was recently released from prison, unemployed, didn't own anything but the clothes on my back. And I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, and I was ready to end it all. But my higher power, who I choose to call God, had other plans, and that train didn't come. And I was able to cross those tracks and walk a couple blocks further and check myself in the drug treatment. And after completing that, I moved back into a homeless shelter. And while living at the homeless shelter, I decided to enroll in a local community college. Did extremely well. Was able to obtain a couple of associate's degrees as well as a bachelor's degree that I like to brag about a little bit because it was a bachelor's degree in public safety management with a concentration in criminal justice. Right, I had figured since I had a lot of experience getting arrested and appearing before judges that that was going to be helpful in my studies, and I like to brag a little bit because it was that real life experience helped me graduate with highest honors, and eventually I was accepted in a law school. And in May of 2014, I graduated with my law degree, and throughout that process, I really experienced a transformation that caused me to really commit my life to giving back to my community, giving back to this country, giving back to humanity in general. And every night when I would get on my knees, I would be actually praying that God would give me the strength, the perseverance, and the stamina and the wisdom, right, to be able to be of greater service so I can make your world, Marcus, your world, Billy, and everyone else that's watching. I prayed, right, that your world would be a better place, even though I had never met you. Right, I had that love for you because I have love for humanity,
So
and that love got me here.
let me and it just gives me goosebumps to know your achievements. But you know, for the audience, they have a taste of who you are. But let me just read. This is a tweet from Michael Vick a day or so ago, and Michael Vick, the NFL famed quarterback, says, "Even after I served my sentence, I still couldn't vote. But thanks to the work of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, I'm one of 1.4 million returning citizens who now has the opportunity. Follow more than a vote to see the rest of my story and get involved." What is it, this work that you've been doing, that people like Michael Vick here, or LeBron James, or John Legend, Michael Bloomberg are so impassioned about?
Wow. You know, this might sound strange, right? Because we're talking about democracy and we're talking about voting rights. All right, but I think the what makes this work so just impactful is that it goes deeper than that, right? It actually goes to our humanity. You know, Marcus, I'm telling you, I am growing every day, and I discovered, you know, even because I voted for the first time in over 30 years last month, and that experience really helped me to understand, especially thinking about the sacrifices that was made and the blood that was shed by my ancestors in order for me to have that moment there, and the sacrifices of returning citizens and supporters for the Amendment 4 campaign. When I went in there, I realized that I was on sacred ground and that what I was actually doing was committing a sacred act. And I started to really truly understand the sacredness of voting, right? And how it's actually elevated above the politics. It's elevated above the racial biases and fears, that it takes us to a place, Marcus, where that we could say something so simple yet so powerful. It says, "I am, I am."
I love it.
Right. And so when you talk about that, you're talking about really getting at the heart of humanity. And when you tap into that source, man, it can't help but be powerful and impactful.
Well, I love it. And I want to bring in our dear friend here, Billy Watterson, who he also plays a very important role in your work and in the work of others in the field. And Billy, I know you through your deep commitment, your deep leadership in criminal justice reform. And, you know, for years, you have been a force helping to shed light on things like the cash bail system and ending it, and pretrial detention, helping to overhaul that whole broken system. But it's fair to say that you have pivoted all of your attention into this election with your work at One for Democracy. So please just give us an overview of what's been happening.
Yeah. Before I even do that, I just want to, lift up Desmond's work for one more second. And I just had someone close to me for the first time that I found out had their voting rights restored. And to hear someone that I knew so well that I didn't even know this was part of their identity, what it meant for them in terms of having their humanity, in terms of having their citizenship restored for that one person, and then to think about 1.4 million people have that happen to them. It's something that brings tears to my eyes every time I hear Desmond talk about it now. So just to think about that 1.4 million people, 1.4 million people who got that humanity, who got that core part of their identity given back to them. And then it's still being people are still trying to take that away from them every day. That's what we're fighting for. People are trying to take that away from them. But like Marcus said, I'm director of Galaxy Gives, which is a philanthropy that focuses on in investing in dismantling our racist and unjust criminal legal system, and instead investing in the communities most impacted by the justice system to flourish. And so why democracy, right? Well, I think what Desmond's saying has already started to speak to that, but we've always had a pro-democracy political lens on criminal justice reform, because mass incarceration is fundamentally a political issue, as all of our issues really are. Our laws are not neutral. They're products of our politics and culture. And it's the politics and culture of being tough on crime that drove mass incarceration. So to unwind mass incarceration, we need an equal and opposite force, pushing politicians to see that it's in their best interest to be pro-criminal justice reform. How do you do that? You empower the communities most affected by mass incarceration that typically have the least voice in our politics. You have 1.4 million people in Florida have their rights come back so they can say our criminal justice system has to change. If those communities, if the 1 in 2 Americans affected by mass incarceration have voice and power to demand change at the ballot box, it will happen. And it will be sustained over time. We can't just ask for change to happen. We need to demand it. We need to have those most affected by it have the power to demand it. So that's led us to, from the beginning, invest in things like Amendment 4, invest in groups like Voices of the Experience in Louisiana, Forward Justice in North Carolina, Justice LA in Los Angeles, because we need our democracy to function, to move the needle on all of the issues that we care about. And that should be core to all of our theory of change, because if we want our systems to change, our democracy needs to work, because we live in a democracy, which means system change should happen by people demanding at the ballot box. If we're not doing it that way, we're doing it wrong. That's the system we live in.
So Billy, and I want to get so much deeper in and to talk to the audience about exactly the kind of things that you're doing to give support in key battleground states in this election. But I want to kind of ask you both to help to ground us. We're literally less than a month out from the most significant election of modern times. Now, if we rewind the clock 20 years to the election of 2000, Bush versus Gore, and he's already holding his head because he knows where I'm going. But for the audience at home, if you can recall the election of 2000, there was this little known word that we all became acquainted with called hanging chads. And this was an election that went all the way to the Supreme Court to be decided in one place, the state of Florida. And so as we sit here in this moment, we're looking at a man, Desmond Meade, who is pivotal. If we look at the most current headlines, the current office holder is already talking about he expects that this election will be decided in the courts. Desmond, you from very early on have always thought this could be a different election based on getting people who traditionally haven't had the right to vote in the game. So I guess what I want to know is, where do you think we're headed? What is the traction that you're seeing on the ground? What is the movement like? Please give us some color here.
Wow. I can't even give this question justice, man. But but bear with me on this for Marcus, because you're talking about where this is heading. You know, I can't predict the future, but this is what I can tell you. I can tell you about the level of intensity among the people who've been reenfranchised. Just a few weeks ago, ran across a young lady who was given 6 months to live. And as we was registering the vote, she started crying because she'd been trying for over 24 years to be able to vote, and she just never thought she would ever have that opportunity because of her felony conviction and her drug addiction. But as she was signing her name on the dotted line, and she looked up and she asked our canvassers to pray that God would allow her to live long enough to cast a ballot, right? Now, here's this woman that's given 6 months to live, and her dying wish was not to go to Disney World or not to meet a celebrity or go to an exotic place. Her dying wish was to be able to be a part of democracy. You know, this is the type of passion that I am seeing in returning citizens throughout the state. You know, unfortunately, when I tried to connect with a reporter, came to find out that her health took a turn for the worse, and family had to rush her in the hospice. And 4 days after getting in the hospice, she passed away. Sadly, it ripped my heart, but it speaks to it really. Like I said, it really speaks to the intensity that people who have lost the right to vote, who have fought long and hard to get it back, it speaks to that intensity that they have to not only come to the polls, but they're going to bring their family, and they're going to bring their friend, and they're going to bring their community, and anybody who can stop long enough to listen and will be compliant enough to be led to the polls. They're bringing them there to have their voices heard. Now, what the opposition or what other people might try to do to minimize that or blunt the impact of it, I can't speak to. We know historically what they've done, but this is what I do know, that we're going to continue coming, and that any kind of tactics that they use, listen, as a person who's been in prison, who's been homeless, who's been hooked on drugs, who've stared down death, right? Guess what? None of what they can do can intimidate us or scare us off. And so we're stepping up even harder, right? And we have even organized a day of action on October 24th, to where returning citizens throughout the entire state of Florida, and we hope the country is going to stand up in unison and say we will be heard, whether you like it or not.
That's incredible. And Billy, a large portion of your work is to uplift the work of the Desmonds around the country, most crucially in the battleground states. So talk to, like, how do you partner with a voting rights activist like a Desmond? What is the critical support that you're able to give?
You get Desmond, you get the many other great leaders out there like Desmond, the resources they need, and you get it to them early. You don't wait until the month before the election like we are now, but even a month before the election, now's the time to invest. Desmond still hasn't fully funded his budget, which is insane. That's a failure on our part. Those of us who have resources. That's a failure on our part to invest in the folks doing the work. People ask all the time, what can I do? And this is a moment. This is what we need to be asking ourselves, right? Like, we know this is going to be one of the most important elections of our lifetime. We know this could be the most important moment of our lifetime. It could be determined whether we save our planet over the next 10 years. Not to mention how we deal with racial injustice in this country. Not to mention how we deal with the public health crisis. Not to mention how we deal with our climate crisis and our refugee crisis. Millions of refugees. That's partially determined by what we do this next month. I mean, it was Barack Obama said what we do these next 76 days will echo through the generations. So if you're not doing everything you can in this moment, if you're not investing as much, if you're not stretching, if you're not a little uncomfortable, you're going to regret it. I know I made the biggest personal investment I made in the work of folks like Desmond I made in my life, and it was uncomfortable. But it was a small sacrifice. What better thing could I spend my money on than helping make sure that we have a world we all want to live in, and that our children can live in?
And specifically, when those in the audience, when they contribute either to Desmond directly or to One for Democracy, Desmond, let's talk, because, as you said, this has been a journey where along this journey, just about every hurdle that could be put in front of you has been put in front of you. Most recently now, they're saying you're trying to run an extortion scheme for votes. And I'm glad you laughed because I think it's that absurd, right? They make the rules and they keep changing the goalposts here. But I want you to respond specifically to the critics here. You know, paying off fines and fees. What problem did this initially come to solve in the first place? Like, why are people like Michael Bloomberg raising $20 million for you to pay off people's fines and fees?
First of all, with all these hurdles, man, they got me feeling like Edwin Moses, you know? Real, man. It's the hurdle after hurdle after hurdle after hurdle. But you know what? Our outlook is wherever people may see obstacles, we see opportunities. And setbacks are actually moments, right, for us to be able to step up into our greatness, right? And that's exactly what we've been doing. But let me see if I can walk this thing through, right? You know, we passed Amendment 4, and we kept politicians out of it, right? And we brought people together from all walks of life.
And just slow down, if you wouldn't mind, for 1 second. For those that don't know, Amendment 4, just give them a little.
Amendment 4 restored voting rights. Prior to Amendment 4, then, you got to know Florida was one of 4 states at the time that anyone, if they ever get convicted of a felony offense, they would lose their civil rights to include the right to vote for the rest of their lives, period, right? And so what Amendment 4 did was create a pathway for people with felony convictions to be able to have access to democracy once they completed their sentence. It didn't apply to people who were convicted of murder or people who were convicted of felony sexual offenses. But everyone else, once they completed their sentence, they had the right to register to vote and participate in elections.
So prior to the introduction of Amendment 4, it doesn't matter if you were Michael Vick, an athlete, an entertainer, or a celebrity. If you had a prior conviction and you lived in the state of Florida,
yes,
doesn't matter your economic status, you didn't have full rights of any other citizen.
Yep, you lost the right to vote, the right to serve on a jury, the right to run for public office, as well as other collateral consequences that I've faced. Like, I've graduated from law school. I have a law degree, but I can't practice law in the state of Florida until my rights have been restored. I can't even buy or even rent a home for my family, right? Because a lot of homeowners associations have written within their bylaws provisions that would restrict me from doing so until my civil rights have been restored. And so these are the challenges that folks had faced in Florida. And Amendment 4 addressed the voting aspect of the civil rights piece and have at least given people the right to vote. So now they can apply leverage to bring about even greater change around criminal justice reform, around clemency, and so many other things that impact marginalized communities.
So once you got Amendment 4 passed, it looked like clear skies, you know, a clear lane of opportunity. 1.4 million people, we're gonna vote. Then
No,
what happens?
Yeah. It didn't.
Okay.
It didn't, because I live in reality, and reality is that no matter how good something is that people come together to do, that politicians and politics will always desecrate it, right? And they they bring this element to it that causes a lot of division, a lot of hatred, a lot of fear, and this divides and just separates our country. And so that's exactly what happened. The arrogance of politicians to think that all of a sudden they can step into the picture and demand or legislate how we implement Amendment 4. And in doing so, they codify the requirements that individuals must pay a litany of legal financial obligations before they're able to enjoy the freedoms of Amendment 4. And most of it was, in fact, poll taxes, reminiscent of the Jim Crow era, when these impediments was put in place to prevent newly freed slaves from participating in democracy.
And now, how much are those poll taxes?
Oh my God, it can go anywhere from a few $100s to multiple millions of dollars.
And these are largely formerly incarcerated people who are, in many cases, struggling to find stable housing, stable employment, who now have to pay fines and fees post incarceration in order to have their full rights restored?
I mean, they're struggling so much that, when you look at the clerk of court, which is in charge of collecting these fees, you see that they have no expectations of collecting any more than 9% of the fees that have been assessed by the court system. So saying that only 9% of people are going to be paying their fines and fees is crazy. But that's exactly what it is. You have people now in Florida that's forced to choose between either putting food on their kids' plate or voting, or choose between paying their rent or mortgage, utility bills, or voting. And that is something that is an affront, a serious affront to democracy, because access to the ballot box should be unencumbered, and it definitely should be free.
And I'm going to ask Billy to join this in a second, but I can remember pre-pandemic, we got together at my place in New York City, and you said to me, I'm going to raise the money to pay off these folks' fines and fees. And I looked at you like, now, Desmond, I love you. But that was like saying, I'm going to go into the ring against Tyson and go 12 rounds. Like, talk to this audience about what has happened over the last couple of months.
So let me tell you, first of all, our campaign, right? The flavor of our campaign is in the same flavor of David and Goliath. You know what I'm saying? Because all of the experts said there was no way in heck that you even get an amendment like that on the ballot, much less pass it, especially in a state as controversial as Florida. And we did that. So yeah, we're a little cocky. We're cocky because we're standing on some values, universal values that we could rally people around. And so, yeah, when these obstacles came, and people had to pay these financial obligations, you best believe I said that, right? Because I know that we have already shown that we can do the impossible. And that's exactly what we've started doing. We've raised over $25 million, bro, right?
Congratulations.
And listen, and it's not from the source that you think it's coming from, right? Mm-hmm. That's just the story in the news. The reality is that over 88,000 people across the country has stepped up and said, we're going to be defenders of democracy, and we're going to free the vote in Florida. And you had the Michael Jordans, the LeBron James. You had sports franchises like the Orlando Magic, Miami Heat, the Miami Dolphins. You had corporations like Viacom and Levi's, right? You had foundations throughout this country and just everyday average American citizens. Ariana Grande stepped up. You had John Legend, who's been a champion for second chances for years, right? Really lead a very concentrated effort in freeing democracy in Florida. And those 88,000 people, right, was able to raise over $25 million. Incredible. Get the credit now. We're going to give credit where credit is due, right? And they raised that money, and that we use that money to pay off fines and fees in 60 of the 67 counties in the state of Florida. There are over 25,000 people right now who now have a clear access, right, to be able to participate in our democracy. And I know the state tried to shut down the system yesterday, but we have persuaded them to extend our voter registration deadline to midnight tonight. And so we're going to continue to get as many people as possible registered, get them riled up and ready to go. Turn out, we bringing the streets to the polls.
Love it.
We're going to save our democracy.
Well, Billy, and thank you for that, Desmond. I'm not going to lie to you. You give me goosebumps when you talk, bro. But Billy, so from the onset of this political cycle, you work in a family office. You work with people who have resources, and rather than allowing people to relax on their yacht or on a beach, you have tapped people with means to really become activists and to use their resources, use their circles, use their voices to directly support the work of the Desmonds of the world. Have you met with a lot of resistance? Are people, kind of checked out? What's been the reaction to you calling and saying, I want your money to support the Desmonds of this country?
So before I answer that, I want to quickly say exactly what One for Democracy's challenge is. And the challenge I want to make to everyone listening is One for Democracy has challenged folks with resources and folks without significant resources to stretch themselves by pledging 1% of their net worth or more this election cycle to democracy. So I'm really trying to set a high bar to say, are you giving enough right now, given the crisis that we're in, given the existential threat to our democracy, to that sacred right to vote that Desmond talked about? So that's my challenge to all of you. And then also a secondary challenge, which is I think even more important, which is to organize. So everyone who takes the pledge, we ask them to organize their community and get them involved, right? In the same way, it's what Desmond's doing. It's what all the groups we're doing that we're supporting are doing, right? Desmond is raising resources, and then he's organizing his community. He's organizing directly impacted people. Folks with resources need to both give and they need to organize their community. It's not enough to say, I wrote a check. You've got to do the work every day to bring in as many people as possible. And then to get them to give to the highly effective groups on the ground that are closest to the work and furthest from the resources, like Desmond's, right? It's often going to be the big national organizations that can have the shiny marketing plan and that are the most connected that are going to get the most resources, not necessarily those who are closest to the work and who have the most important work to do. All of that work's important, right? But part of what we also do at One for Democracy is we set up the One for Democracy Fund, an action fund, and an advisory board, which makes recommendations to donors of the groups that typically don't get support, but which have a critical role to play in making sure that our democracy expands, is protected this election. And to your question of had people had resistance? Absolutely. The challenge of giving 1% when you feel like you're already doing a lot is challenging, right? But that's the idea of it. We're trying to push people. We're trying to get people to feel uncomfortable. This should be a moment where we should be making ourselves a little uncomfortable. And I'm happy to say almost 110 individuals, families, and foundations have stepped up to take that pledge of 1%. And that's collectively moved $65 million in new resources out into great organizations like Desmond's. But again, there's still a lot more that needs to happen. So if you're listening right now, consider stretching yourself.
And Billy, give us a use case. We're here with Desmond, but you've been at this for a couple of months. Folks have put resources into the hat. You've been able to deploy that into the field. Is there a circumstance where you can already see the impact of being able to shift resources?
Yeah, I mean, well, Desmond has given one great example, right? Which is that now 25,000+ people who weren't going to be able to vote, who had their right restored, can now vote. Obviously, that wasn't us, right? That was 80,000 people. We played a role in that, right? We were able to get folks to invest in that. I think you also, Marcus, before this, asked me to talk about what does it actually mean to have your voting rights suppressed, and how are we counting that, right? So, I break that down, and I'm really stealing this from Mark Elias, who runs Democracy Doc, in terms of the pieces that this should be broken down into. But starting back in the spring, we focused first on suppressive voting laws, right? So supporting organizations on the ground that were doing advocacy work to try to expand, change the rules that make it easier for people to vote by mail, for example. I was supporting groups like ACLU of Michigan, PA Alliance Foundation, Democracy North Carolina, that did the advocacy work to actually change the rules and make them better for folks. It was supporting efforts to engage in litigation against the Republican-funded litigation efforts to remove voter protections. So that was investing in groups like Democracy Docket that have been fighting those battles in courts. A third way is voter intimidation that we can expect to happen on election day. You heard Trump. He said, "Proud Boys stand by." And he actually encouraged his voters
to go to the polls.
Go to the polls. We've seen that story play out before. So for us, that's meant investing in local organizations that are going to set up voter protection hotlines, that are recruiting poll workers. Like Desmond can talk about how he's helped recruit how many returning citizens to be poll workers?
Over 150.
That's incredible.
Yes, 150.
Or groups like We the Action that are recruiting attorneys to be observers at poll sites, ready to respond to voting rights violations. And then also preparing for long lines, right? There's going to be, we've seen it in the primaries, right? So that's been, work to get resources directly to cities so that they can open more polling places, right? That's been helping with efforts like the Election Supercenter project that's trying to open up stadiums to be additional polling places. And then defeating misinformation. We know there's going to be misinformation targeting particularly Black and brown voters. We saw it happen in 2016. We saw it happen in 2018. So that's both funding national efforts like Win Black Palante that are specifically focused on identifying and targeting misinformation. And it's investing in the grassroots groups on the ground that have built relationships year over year. Doesn't matter if it's a presidential election year or not, with their communities, and who have credible relationships, warm relationships with them to say, hey, here's what the rules are. Here's how you can vote. Make your voting plan. Vote early. Groups exactly like Desmond's, right? So that's the type of stuff that we're moving resources to. And we still need to keep moving resources to, because these fights are happening right now. So that's just an example.
Fantastic. Well, Desmond, I want to say to you both, you inspire my life every day. And I'll be very honest. I plan on voting. I'm going to vote by absentee ballot. But I was really moved to organize this because you all are really fighting. You are on the front line, and I'm just so honored to see the ways in which every day that you're out here fighting. I want to ask Desmond, I really wanted to organize this time to talk to, in particular, young men of color who we just have a history of feeling disenfranchised. And I felt it was important to speak directly to our young men of color and to speak to them in a way where they know how important their vote is in this election. So if you wouldn't mind talking to young Black men, young brown men right now.
Yeah, I run across my brothers on a consistent basis, and hear my vote don't count. It doesn't matter who gets in office, and even the one that says, should we had a Black man as president and our situation got worse or whatever, and this is what I tell folks. Really, a couple of things. Number one is that if our vote didn't matter, it wouldn't be so many people using so many resources to try to stop us from voting. And even if you don't really grasp how valuable the right to vote is, just the fact that somebody's trying to get it from you ought to make you hold on to it, right? To make you use it, right? But I can't, I was on the Breakfast Club the other day, and I was talking to Solomon, and what I told him was how it is up on us that we have the power to change the conditions that we are experiencing in our communities. But that power does not show up unless we show up at the polls. And we can't show up at the polls unless we register. So many times, though, we wait for other people to do the rescuing. When I was a shorty and I was shy and I had a crush on this young lady, and I sent my best friend to find out if she liked me, he never came back. Right? He took the girl and gone. Needless to say, he was not my best friend anymore. But I learned at a very early age that you cannot depend on anyone to get the thing that you desire or that you need. That if there's something in our community that we need, we cannot depend on a politician, right? We cannot. We have to take ownership of that, and we have to make things happen and make demands. And we do that. We exert our power and our will by showing up to the polls, being counted. That's when we can make a difference. And so I tell them to come on, hey, listen, mount up, even if you don't understand what's going on, right? But if your homeboy come and tell you he got some beef around the corner off of 34th, you're going to mount up and you're going to roll with your homeboy, right? And you don't have all the answers, but you're going to roll with your homeboy. And so I appeal to you, my brothers, that you got some brothers that need you to mount up and roll with us to the polls, right? And you don't have to understand it all, but roll with us to the polls, and you see great things happen.
I thank you for that. I spend a bit of time talking to young men who, at a young age, you desire power. You want to be empowered, and you want access to power. And what I try to explain is that in corporate America, one of the most important people is the shareholder, right? The shareholder has the power to decide who the CEO is, right? The shareholder has a sway in how the corporation is run. And to the degree that America is a corporation, it's your vote that decides who the next CEO is. And so you, as the power of the shareholder, with the shareholder vote, that is the first step to all the power that you could ever acquire, is to realize that power of that vote. And so I really appreciate the work that you're doing and, really trying to uplift that message. Billy, again, I wanted to really dig into the voter suppression, things that we know historically, redistricting, gerrymandering, even, tricks and tactics familiar to the state of Florida, things like holding up a jar of marbles and needing to guess the right amount of marbles in order to exercise your vote in the Jim Crow era. What are the things that, you have been really seeing are the impediments to getting people out to vote that, those folks in the field are trying to combat?
I mean, listen, Trump and Republican donors have put 100. Sorry, my dog.
It's all good.
Have put $100 million into litigation efforts focused on, purging voters from the rolls, right? And they just won a victory, and I think it was South Carolina yesterday that made it so you can't put an absentee ballot in without having a witness. So it's basic things which it should be easy to vote. We should want to make it easy to vote. We should want this to be a representative democracy where as many people are going to participate as possible, and we're going to have the full will of the people. But unfortunately, it's become the strategy of one side to make it harder for people to vote. It's a winning strategy. And it can work if we aren't ready to fight against it. It's working in places right now. There's going to be long lines at polling places. And this, we kind of have the perfect storm of a pandemic, which is a great excuse to make it so there's less voting sites, which is a great excuse to scare people. And we also have, an RNC that's come out from under a consent decree for the first time in 30 years.
What does that mean, Billy?
That means that the Civil Rights Department at the Department of Justice had the Republican National Committee under a consent decree, which basically prevented them from using certain tactics that include, essentially voter intimidation, right? Which is getting off-duty correctional officers to show up to observe polling places. Who do you think that's targeted at?
Right.
And again, we've heard that's gonna happen. We've got to be ready for it. I mean, it's probably gonna happen like never before this year.
So shifting, if there are any questions that anyone has for my guests, Desmond Meade or Billy Watterson, please feel free to ask. Desmond, I'm just so proud. The book covers behind you. Today the book is out. I imagine it is everywhere that you can find, Amazon and other places.
Mahogany books, brother.
Mahogany books, fantastic. Tell us about the book and what does it chronicle?
Wow, this book actually follows my life from the time I was at the railroad tracks all the way to November 2018 when we passed Amendment 4. But in between, it really talks about my struggles with drug addiction and the different life lessons that I've learned throughout recovery, and this really goes into my mindset that helps shape the strategy for actually even thinking about launching a ballot initiative in Florida, much less passing it. And so I would like to consider this book as a book of hope and inspiration that really shows folks that no matter what obstacles you may face in life, that you can overcome those obstacles, and you can take the very same things that really held you down or depressed you. You can take those things and use it to not only transform yourself, but transform your community and the world. And I think that at the core of all of that is a simple four-letter word: love. I opened the book with the chapter "Love is one today," right, and believing that if we embrace love a lot more than we have been over these last several years, that we would actually create a much better society for us to live in.
I totally agree. I often think that the greatest lesson that America must learn is empathy, because our most critical issue is the lack of empathy for other, right? We have this problem of othering, um, not humanizing the Desmonds of the world and seeing them as full citizens, but seeing them as something to be feared or different and other than myself. And we create whole separate laws for those others. And it's until we really start to empathize with each other's experiences that this country will be healed. But we're in, just a few minutes remaining. Billy, I'd love for you to give a call to action to this audience. People of great means, people of little means, what are, less than a month out, some actions that people can take?
I mean, I'm mostly going to reiterate what I said already, which is one, take the 1% pledge. If not, just stretch yourself. You should be uncomfortable in what you're doing right now. If you have resources, put them to work. What could be more important than this moment? When are you going to need those resources more than this moment? Are you going to want to look back and know you didn't do everything you could do? 2, organize. Organize your community. Get them involved. Get them to support Desmond's work. Get every single one of your friends, family members, coworkers to write Desmond a check in this last month, because he's got work to do. I think he's still got at least $3 million he's trying to raise right now. And, but beyond that, he's still going to have to pay off fines and fees for a whole bunch more people. So invest now. Don't wait another day. Don't wait another second, and make yourself uncomfortable, and then organize. And then 3, vote early. Vote early. Vote early. And then find a way to volunteer. And then once you've written all your checks, once you've organized your community, find a way to put yourself to work in this last month. Also, whether it's writing letters, whether it's phone banking, whether it's being a poll worker, don't leave anything on the table. Put yourself to work. That's what this is all about. Desmond is going to be grinding. He's going to be grinding this last month. You can be working as hard as Desmond is.
I feel like you're putting me to work, Billy. And to be very honest, Desmond, before we hopped on, Billy and I both agreed that we're going to basically move to Miami so that we can be boots on the ground with you. So you got 2 soldiers signed up.
All right, well, y'all better be ready to work.
So Desmond, in the remaining minutes, let's talk directly to the audience. Like, love your story, love your work. How can they contribute? How can they get involved?
First of all, they can always visit our website at www.floridarrc.com. And right there on our homepage, you have an opportunity to donate, right? You have an opportunity to find other ways of getting involved with the organization as well. I like to tell folks, man, that, we all have heard the adage that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Right. And I believe that is also true in our society. And if we are to become a great country, a great community, that we must empower those that are weakest among us. Right. And the rising tide lifts all boats. Right. And so I would encourage folks to really support the work that we're doing, because it goes beyond just voting. It goes to strengthening marginalized communities. It goes to creating a more inclusive, more vibrant democracy that's good for all of us, right? And I end with this, because, we've heard that voting is the difference between life and death, and we've seen it play out in real life in 2020. Well, I could say right now, you ought to donate, right, as if your life depends on it, because it does. The work that we're doing on the ground is going to make the difference on the direction that this country is going, and you need to donate like your life depends on it.
And one final thought and question, Desmond, but for anyone who is listening who might be formerly incarcerated in the state of Florida, I've seen friends who are formerly incarcerated that have gotten texts that said, hey, if you have fines and fees, get in touch with us. We want to help you. Is there a message that you could send to those brothers and sisters?
Well, you got family here. You got a huge, powerful family here in Florida with the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Listen, you could text fines to the number 82623. Text fines, FINES, to the number 82623. Or you can hit us up, www.floridarrc.com, or dial 1-877 my vote 0. 1-877 my vote 0. If you are a returning citizen that's living in Florida, or if you have a loved one who's a returning citizen that lives in Florida, please connect them to us. We're their family. We're building power within the state, and our voice in 2020 will matter. We got the juice here in 2020, and they know it, and that's why they're running scared, right? But we are going to finally make a difference in our community, especially around criminal justice reform. Hit us up.
Well, Desmond, I think I speak for Billy and myself. We're going to grab our sleeping bags, so make a little room on the couch. But literally, I love you and your family, both of you, and I want to be a part of this tidal of change that you are helping to create in our world. And I'm always inspired by the words of Gandhi, who said, be the change in the world you wish to see. And in both of you men, I see that. I see the change that I don't want to sit at home watching network news feeling disenfranchised that there's no answers. And to know the change makers that you both are just makes me inspired, and why I wanted to bring this conversation live today. So I just want to thank you both, and let's agree to have this conversation post-election so we can further this great work, because there is so much work to do. So will you promise to join me in that?
Scout's honor, Brother Marcus. Got you. Looking forward to it, man. Really
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Again, Billy Watterson, Desmond Meade, and Marcus Glover, and we're signing off. So thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Peace.
Peace. Thank you.